Good evening and welcome to this pre-performance talk. I'm Antonio Cascelli, Head of Music Department at Maynooth University, and I would like to thank the organizers of the Limerick Early Music Festival for inviting me to offer a few thoughts to guide us through the appreciation of the musics that will be performed at this evening's concert. Let's start from the title of the concert, I Baci, the Kisses. What does this title tell us about the music that is going to be performed? The source that gave inspiration for this title is the text from Barbara Strazi's duet, O dolci, o cari, o desiati baci. The full text in English reads in this way: O sweet, O dear, O desirable kisses, united souls come on these lips to meet. With a kiss these souls are able to strike at the heart. Charmingly they reconcile, spitefully they bite. But it is in their sweet battle that hearts are joined. O sweet, O dear, O desirable kisses. The kiss is of course quite ubiquitous in textual sources throughout the centuries. Probably one of the first and foremost reference has a biblical stamp to it and can be found in this verse. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for love is better than wine. Taken from the Song of Songs in the First Testament, this verse represents the mutual love between a bride and a groom in a very physical and sensual way. The whole Song of Songs is then interpreted as a representation of the love of God for his creatures, yet the prima facie meaning of the text is still there in its full materiality. A textual source much closer to Strazi's can be found in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. During their first encounter at Juliet's house, the two protagonists play with the words kiss, lips, hands, and pray. The beauty of Shakespeare's own words warrant a full citation here. Romeo: if I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Juliet: good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm his holy palmer's kiss. Romeo: have not saints lips and holy palmers too? Juliet: a pilgrim lips that they must use in prayer. Romeo: O then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. From these examples emerges that a multi-layered emotional world surrounds the word kiss. It signifies an action on the threshold between the secular and sacred worlds. It tells us thus of a world where the borders between spiritual and physical love are very porous. One only have to think of Bernini's sculpture of the ecstasies of Saint Teresa, based on the saint's own description of her ecstasies, to visualize the overlapping, almost the interchangeability of the two worlds as reflected in the emotional and spiritual experiences in the 17th century. This is Bernini's sculpture, and these are Saint Teresa's own words. I saw in his hand a long spear of gold, and at the iron's point there seemed to be a little fire. He appeared to me to be thrusting it at times into my heart, and to pierce my very entrails. When he drew it out, he seemed to draw them out also, and to leave me all on fire with the great love of God. The pain was so great that it made me moan, and yet so surpassing was the sweetness of this excessive pain that I could not wish to be rid of it. The soul is satisfied now with nothing less than God. The pain is not bodily but spiritual, though the body has its share in it. It is a caressing of love so sweet which now takes place between the soul and God, that I pray God of his goodness to make him experience it, who may think that I am lying. The spiritual experience has to be described, and the only way to do so is to use words that can refer to a very earthly and human experience. The case thus gives expression to a broad range of emotional and spiritual experiences in the 16th and 17th century. But where is music in all this? Let's step back a few decades. In chapter 23 of his 1555 L'antica musica ridotta alla moderna pratica, the ancient music reduced to the modern practice, entitled How to Compose for Two Voices with Examples, Vicentino writes, with respect to compositions for 3, 4, and 5 voices, the draw is comparable to the difference between the nude and the clothed figure in painting. Every painter depicts a completely clothed figure quite well, whereas not all painters can do the same with the nude. The same is true of composers of music. Many write works for 4 or more voices, but few possess the refined manner required to combine the steps and consonants in a duo. The same comparison is repeated almost verbatim by Tigrini 30 years later in his Il Compendio della Musica, the Compendium of Music. The comparison between the clothed and nude figures brings to memory a painting by Titian, Sacred and Profane Love, from 1514. Undoubtedly one of Titian's most famous paintings. Described in 1613 as Beauty Adorned and Beauty Unadorned, only in a 1693 inventory of the Borghese collection is the painting given its now familiar title Sacred and Profane Love, a moniker that has nonetheless shaped the modern literature on the painting, as scholars debate which figure is sacred and which profane. Among the various interpretations, Erwin Panofsky's 1969 reading of the painting as a representation of the celestial Venus, the nude, and the earthly Venus, the clothed figure, mentioned by the 15th century philosopher Marsilio Ficino, has been particularly influential. The 3 texts, by Titian, Vicentino, and Tigrini, belong to a complex mosaic of meanings attached to the nude in this period. As Thomas Martin reminds us, in Renaissance Europe and Italy, the nude figure became, together with the geometry of pictorial perspective, an increasingly differentiating element between Renaissance and medieval art. During the Renaissance, artists began to paint the human body with growing attention to detail. The use of perspective enabled them to present the body effectively in its 3-dimensional shape, capturing all the elements that contribute to a real-life impression. The human body and its representations were central in conception of selfhood and community, and the way human subjectivity relates to God. At the same time, the body became the object of scientific investigation by scholars of medicine and anatomy. In the context of Renaissance Italy, where the nude figure in its pervasiveness was central to critical debates, the use of an analogy with nude and clothed figures in a musical treatise, bringing together discourses of polyphonic composition and the representation of the body in its subjectivity, demands careful consideration. The analogy carries over to the sphere of music ambiguities present, and sometimes thematized and discussed, in the visual field. Ambiguities whose implications for the changing musical practices of the late 16th century may be quite profound. Vicentino and Tigrini proposed that polyphony for 3 or more voices be associated with a clothed figure, whereas two-part counterpoint is the same figure exposed in its nudity. A few lines earlier in L'Antica Musica, Vicentino has mentioned that the duo is often placed in the middle of a motet, surrounded by sections using a richer polyphonic texture. The notion of a nude duo in the midst of clothed polyphony in the context of a composition setting a sacred text invites comparison with the use of the naked body in sacred art. Nudes in paintings of sacred subjects serve to emphasize the human nature of the saints, Christ and the Virgin Mary, yet they sit on a threshold between the sacred and the secular. It was not uncommon for these vivid representations of the human flesh to cause sensual tensions in the viewer, a difficulty exemplified in the contemporary polemics surrounding Michelangelo's Last Judgment. Similar interchangeabilities between sacred and profane characterize contemporary music culture, not infrequently centered on the female form, producing similar debates. The long-standing practice of building mass settings upon the music of secular songs is a case in point, its threshold difficulties neatly exemplified in Orlando di Lasso's Missa Entrevue Fil from 1581, based on an erotic song describing the bodies of young women. Another musical practice exploring exchange between sacred and profane is the tradition of contrafacta, where music initially created for secular texts was reused for sacred texts or vice versa. For example, Monteverdi's Il pianto della Madonna set to the music of his Lamento di Arianna. In establishing the difficulty of writing down two-part counterpoint, Vicentino is capturing, albeit briefly, the moment when oral traditions, mostly improvised traditions, become the foundation of monodic music, leading then to the development of fully written solo song. Associating this moment with the difficulty of the nude figure, in the midst of the Renaissance fascination with the naked human figure, suggests for two-part counterpoint a multi-layered and interconnected nakedness. Technically, two-part counterpoint is simply the smallest combination of voices. From the performance point of view, whether appearing in the middle of a polyphonic motet or functioning as the basis for solo-accompanied song, two parts appear and sound naked. This performative nakedness, like the nude figure in a sacred context, creates tension with the text and highlights how solo song might emphasize aspects of eroticism and nakedness expressed in the text, regardless of whether the text is a religious one or not. But how is this sense of nakedness, nudity, achieved in the songs that we are going to listen? And how does the interchangeability between sacred and profane emerge? I do not have time here to explore all the musical details of the compositions. I would like to try, though, to offer a few suggestions. The harmonic simplicity of the repeated two-note bass line in Tarquinio Merula's Canzonetta Spirituale from 1638, the second piece in today's program, is probably the epitome of nudity in music, but the simplicity here is paired with a metric ambiguity. The disposition, in fact, of the two notes, short, long, within a triple meter, seems to move the main metric accent onto the second beat. Combined with the accents in the text, the division in 3 beats of each bar presents a level of unpredictability, as the main accents sometimes do not fall where we would expect them to be. Harmonic simplicity and metric ambiguity and uncertainty offer the ground to a melody that, in its use of melismas and dissonances, gets very close to the solo music used to set secular texts. Yet here it joins the text of a lullaby which, sung by the Virgin Mary to the infant Jesus, projects both him and the listeners into what the future will hold for Christ. It is not in fact a traditional reassuring lullaby. The Virgin Mary tells Jesus to sleep now because the time that waits for him is a time made of pain. Barbara Strozzi's L'Eraclito Amoroso is a lament sung by a woman who wants to shout out to the world the fact that the faith she places in her lover is now dead. From the musical point of view, it is a concentration of all possible music effects, the intensity of the vocal expression, emotionally charged words, use of dissonances. The nakedness of the setting here, with the soloist pouring out her emotions, may have stronger sensual connotations than in Mervola's canzonetta, but the sounds world they both conjure up does not set the spiritual and the secular worlds apart. The simplicity of the two-note bass line in Mervola here finds expression in the pattern of descending 4 notes, a descending tetrachord, repeated multiple times in the more lyrical sections of the entire piece. For a clear example of the interchangeability of effects and affects between sacred and secular compositions, I would recommend paying attention to these textual fragments. The final O Dulci Virgo Maria in Monteverdi's Salve Regina, from his Selva Morale e Spirituale. This is the opening piece of today's concert, but also the references to the tears, both in Monteverdi's Salve Regina, Hac Lacrimarum Valle, and in Zefiro Torna, Come vuol mia ventura, or piango or canto. The emotional emphasis placed on the word dulci in the Salve Regina by Monteverdi is reminiscent of the emphasis that we could find in many secular songs, where the speaking voice, the singing voice, is addressing her beloved. The dissonance between the bass line and the top singing voice are the words Hac Lacrimarum Valle, in this valley of tears. The descending line in the main voice, the increasing moving intensity when the pattern is repeated for 3 times, but each time on higher pitches, before starting the dense and more joyful pattern of the opening section. This sense of increasing expressive and poignant energy would be equally well placed in a composition lamenting the desolate status of an abandoned lover. And compare this with the words Come vuol mia ventura, or piango or canto, as my fate wishes I now cry, I now sing, in Zefiro Torna. Here too, listen for the increasingly effective use of dissonances, which, whilst giving expression to tears, reveal an expression of indulgence, of lingering with pleasure over this moment of tension that will be released at the word canto, sing. The call and response, like an echo effect, of the 2 voices in Monteverdi's Salve Regina and in the opening section of Barbara Strozzi's I Baci. In both cases it's almost like 2 voices chasing each other in search of a kiss. But feel also the excitement of the dance inherent to the triple meter in Monteverdi's Venite, venite, siziente. O come to the waters, all you who thirst for the Lord, because God's love is better than wine which consoles the world. Whose text is a blending of texts from the book of Isaiah, the book of Proverbs, and the Song of Songs. And compare this to the dance feeling coming through Zefiro Torna. But also look for and listen to the same effects, dissonances, repeated bass lines, dance, rhythm in the instrumental pieces. Ultimately, What we hear emerging through these pieces are the voices of the human subjectivity, whose full emotional world put them in their full nudity at the center of the experiences that define them in the relationship between themselves and between them and the spiritual world, with all the contradictions and tensions between the spiritual and secular worlds. Thank you.